Welcome to the STARR Coalition podcast. My name is Luke Kramer, Executive Director of the STARR Coalition, where we meet with movers and shakers and thinkers within mental health and other areas, just to kind of talk about different subjects that affect us. And so we're glad that you're here. So today I've got Michael Dean. Michael is, from what I know of you, is one of the creative types, right?
Yes,
Born in Kansas City and lived here with your grandparents, and then you went out to LA for a while, right? So you decided to leave the great state of Arkansas for a little bit to break away and do a few things. Tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Santa Barbara for college. I went to Westmont and then California Lutheran in Thousand Oaks and graduated from California Lutheran. And then I started doing humanitarian projects, focused mostly on poverty and addiction issues, as well as food insecurity and homelessness. And then I did a little acting, and so if you want to call it acting, and some PSAs, and then I went through some life changes and decided to come back to Arkansas. And it was a great place. This is a great place to heal, and that's kind of where I'm at in my journey right now.
It seems to be a lot of people that are from here move out to the world, do some things, and then come back home.
Yeah, I mean, there's no place like home, and I think as you get older, you find yourself wanting, to slow down, to be, to go back where your heart belongs, and where you grew up. I mean, I think that's important. I think our lives often take a circle, and we end up where we began, and I'm happy here. I mean, this is truly an amazing place.
It really is. Yeah. It's pretty underrated. Generally, when I say I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas, people are like, "Oh, well." I'm like, it's a wonderful place to be.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of creativity here. There are a lot of really creative people within the state. I mean, there is a creative hub, and so you do photography now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I mean, for me, it was a way for me to deal with the grief and then the subsequent depression. I was able to channel all that into photography, and I started out as amateur, and it's turned into a success. Mm-hmm. And so, and for me right now, it's a great way to also find another way to heal, to channel emotions that are going on, that I'm able to spend the days roaming the city or roaming other cities and other countries, taking photography. I'm taking photographs of things I see, and I love that.
So we met for the first time at a rally at the Capitol that we had for mental health, and we had, of course, Patrick Kennedy, and a great speaker and very inspirational. And you came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, I really want to talk to you, that I have a story to tell, and that perhaps you've reached a place in your life that you are able and comfortable and ready to talk about some of the things that have happened in your life that have caused a tremendous amount of grief and I'm sure anxiety and stress and all the things that kind of circle around loss, and that you wanted to be able to speak." And I said, well, there are going to be opportunities, and something's coming up on Saturday, which we can talk about. But coming home and healing in Arkansas, I mean, can you give us a little bit of a backstory about what's happened with you in your life that has perhaps caused, I don't want to say a derailment, but I would say that a good friend of mine described it as you're just cruising down the highway and all of a sudden you have a blowout.
Yeah.
And everything has to stop and you have to reassess everything. What occurred with you to have that blowout, to have to stop and reassess everything that's happening around you?
Yeah, that's a perfect description, because you think, everything is going great. You're on the right path, and then all of a sudden, as you said, it blows up. So in 2012, my mama entered hospice, and she passed in April of 2012. And then 6 weeks later, I lost my partner to suicide. And that just completely turned my world upside down. So I was already grieving, as it was anyway, and then to lose somebody that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. and it left a lot of unanswered questions, of course. And for me, I didn't know what to do with that, because I lived a life of privilege. You don't think that these sort of things can happen to you, and so for me, the first year was very numbing. I spent a lot of time in bed. I mean, that's how I initially dealt with it, and I gave up on everything that I had done. I mean, I couldn't function, and so I wanted to move away from LA, and so I picked the farthest place possible, which was Boston, and that was not a good decision. So 9 months later, I moved back to Arkansas because this is where my heart, this is where my heart is, and I feel like I'm part of the human race. I mean, here they constantly confirm your humanity, and so, excuse me one moment. And so in the aftermath, with Curtis's death and my mama's, but mostly Curtis, I think Curtis is the big issue. And so, because we always, losing our parents is something we know is going to happen, but losing your 37-year-old partner was, it was shocking. I mean, there's no other word for it. And I've been reliving every moment leading up to that because I'm trying to figure out what I had missed. And I think that that's all part of the grieving process, but it's been very difficult for me to let that go. And so moving back here was a way for me to start, because I started struggling with depression. It was very hard for me to identify. I grew up in a time period where we didn't talk about mental illness, and I didn't understand. As much as I've been educated, I really did not understand it. And like I said, I have a life of privilege. I mean, these things you would think wouldn't impact you, but they do. So, inside, we all have a brain. We all have emotions, and things impact us the same but differently. I mean, in a lot of ways. And I know that sounds like a paradox, but I think at some point, as I've realized this journey, we're all going to struggle with some sort of depression and some sort of mental illness, because that's what happens in life. We're going to be thrown, as you said, a curveball. We're going to be thrown with things that we don't know what to do with. And so for me, like I said, the depression started setting in. I noticed I was distancing myself more and more from people, not being able to connect to the world. I mean, I was living, but I was just simply living and not existing. Existing but not living. So I got that turned around. And I really miss Curtis. I mean, with my mama and then with Curtis, I didn't know what to do, because those were the two people I thought would be around. And my daddy was entering the last stages of Alzheimer's, and so half my family was gone at that point. So, but I noticed behavioral changes, things that I weren't happy about, and things that weren't characteristic of me. And so I finally got the courage to go ask for help. And I think that that's probably the strongest thing you could ever do. People often think it's a sign of weakness, but by asking for that help was an important step. And I found a great therapist here, started some medication, but unfortunately for me, the train had already left the station. I had asked a little bit too late. And so 2.5 years after losing my mom and Curtis, I suffered a stroke as a result of the anxiety and the depression, because I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, and all of it it was a perfect storm. And I had to relearn how to talk and to do basic things in life. I mean, it was very frustrating to me. And so, and even in the aftermath, I thought that would be a turning point for me. And it turns, with grief and depression, once it takes hold, you really have to work hard every day on making sure you stay on top of it and try to utilize the resources. And I didn't do a great job with that. Once again, I wasn't sure how to do it. And like I said, I'm educated. It didn't make sense, and I'm really hard on myself. So I was, after some soul searching, as I was going through this, I noticed that things were even getting worse after I finished rehab for the stroke. I chose to check into treatment for grief and depression. I found a place in Memphis and that specializes on grief and losing people to suicide. And so I made a life decision at that point to take 30 days away from the world and to focus on myself, which I've never been great about. I've always been great about helping other people, but never great about taking care of myself. And losing Curtis raised that question as well. Like, how was I so great at helping other people, but somehow I missed the person I love more than life itself? Like, how did I miss those signs? And we had, I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the board, but
that's great.
And Curtis and I talked about it. I mean, this was not his first suicide attempt, and so he had tried in December. He went on a bender. He was struggling with drugs as well as mental illness, dual diagnosis. But I believed him that he said that this wasn't going to happen again, and so I left it be. And it turns out he was just continuing to hide the addiction. And 5 months later, I had lost him. And so, I apologize. So going to treatment for me was, a chance for me to say that I matter, because I really didn't feel like I did. I was carrying that burden of losing Curtis. Like, somehow it was all my fault. And I still struggle with that. And I wish I had done more. I mean, I live in this what-if world that I'm still struggling with every day. But every day I'm taking one step closer. And so being in treatment was an important thing to say. Like I said, that I matter, that I'm worth something, and that I want to be able to honor Curtis by surviving this, because I know in the heart of my hearts he wants me to survive this. And so, and coming out of treatment and continuing therapy here, I decided to take some time off, even more from life in general. So I turned to photography again and decided to do that as a freelance, lining up with Getty and some other agencies. And I learned how to grow. I mean, and I'm still growing, and I'm still, there are days and there are months where it hurts. I mean, and it's hard for me to participate in the world, and it's easy to isolate. But luckily, I have a great team of people that I have put together that helps me through this, both doctors and friends. I make sure that I, attend weekly therapy sessions. I do a grief group as well. I started traveling and talking about Curtis's journey and our journey together, and my journey in the aftermath of it all. And that's where I'm finding healing. I mean, I find it really fascinating that somehow we can take our pain and turn it into good. Because if I can make sure that one person, doesn't take their life because we've decided to, I've decided to listen and not to judge, to not allow stigmas to create barriers. That's what I think that's the gift that Curtis has given me in the aftermath. And I talk about, one of the things I talk about is that I'm not the same person I was when Curtis died. And sometimes it's frustrating, but the interesting thing is I think I'm more compassionate. I'm able to view people, that are struggling without judgment for the most part, that they're always welcome and that we're going to get through this together. And I think that was his final gift. That's how he's living on. And so for me, those are the life changes. And,
it's a beautiful thing that I think it's very difficult for us in that moment of grief, of losing someone, and being able to say that there is something about them that we will take with us and will manifest itself in the way that we see the world, and the way that we interact with other human beings, and the way that and it's not always easy, right? I mean, the idea of grief is it's yours.
Right.
There may be a lot of people who've gone through similar circumstances, but the grief that you are holding is yours and yours only. And the way that you are going to grow or break apart is going to be dependent on you.
Right.
And it's obviously taken many years for you to feel like that you're starting to gain some traction again. and it's hard to see that beyond where you are at that moment. So, I mean, how were you able at some of those darkest moments, were you able to still be able to see that there was something beyond you? And I know that it's difficult to be able to see that, but there are others, I'm sure, that are going through maybe something similar that you have. What do you say about looking just beyond where you are at this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is difficult, as you said, to see progress. I mean, my therapist constantly reminds me that when we started this journey 4 years ago, I am much further along. And one of the things is I'm still alive. I mean,
right.
I think that's the biggest indicator. But, I keep on thinking back to Betty Ford. And I think that there's a couple of things. And so Betty Ford, I believe, was the one that said, one day at a time. It's something that she talked about, addiction. And I believe that applies to people struggling with grief and struggling with depression. Especially if you're struggling, looking too far ahead can be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so I find myself, whenever I'm having a tough week or a tough month, that I kind of step back and say, let's look forward to the next day, or let's look forward to the next week. And I've been trying to do little things that will make sure, like Curtis loved Halloween, for example. So right. For the last couple of years, I decided to make new plans, and I spend time with my friends in Omaha or other places in the United States, wherever they're at. So that way, I don't have to necessarily focus on the grief, because if I'm at home on those days, I relive the memories. I'm watching home videos, and listening to voicemails, and then you get close to the edge again. Yeah. And so I think the important thing is like I said, taking one day. Sometimes I even have to take 1 second or 1 minute. And I think eventually I'll get to the point where I'll be able to look a couple years down the road. And even 6 years later, I'm still struggling with that. And as you said, grief is so unique to every person. And that's one of the things I keep on telling people, is that we can't allow other people to dictate how we grieve or for how long. Right. Sometimes it's important to push those people out for the time being. Don't close those doors, but they don't need to be around you. And I saw that especially after I went into treatment. And like I said, I chose this place. I chose to go. But some of my friends and family that were in my life thought I was a broken toy that just been sent off to a factory to be fixed. And when I didn't come home fixed, that was the end for them.
It was a failure.
It was a failure.
Right. And
it was scary, I have to say. I mean, going into treatment and coming home, it took me a long time to adjust, because the world was just so different. Yeah. Because you're learning these new tools, how to cope with the new reality before you. And so, and like I said, for people that are struggling, as I keep on going back, just take baby steps. Often I write out goals, and I think another important thing for me that I'm starting to do that shows the progress is I keep a gratitude journal. Mm-hmm. So every day I try to find 3 things to be thankful for, and to try to take those, to take those things to make a difference in the world. So often those things are gratitude, are like, what can I do to help somebody else? And for me, that is paying it forward, because there are so many people on their own way, whether if they realize it or not. And one reason why I moved back here is like, people smile at you here. Right. They don't do it in LA or New York or Boston for that example. Right. But those little things.
You seem to exist.
You seem to exist. They wave at you. It's those little things. And so, they often say don't make big life changes after a loss. But I think in this case it was important for me. But once again, everybody does it differently. I mean, when I'm in grief groups, some people talk about how they got rid of their spouses or their children's clothes right away. It took me 2 years before I could get rid of Curtis's clothes. And I couldn't bear to think that somebody around Little Rock would be wearing them. So I sent them to a thrift shop in LA, because I wanted to make sure that I knew, it was also another way for me to take care of myself. But once again, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. And like I said, I really hope that people would step up, and say that they need help, because there are so many people willing to listen. And I mean, that's part of the work that you all are doing. I mean, that rally was amazing to see all those people and to hear Patrick speak and some of the other speakers, because we need those voices.
So for you, I guess it took kind of years before you finally said, I need help, before you reached out, which is not unusual. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people tend to wait, or they're so wrapped up in that process. That fog has set in, and it has not lifted enough for you to be able to even see, like you said, just a little ways, not years down the road, but just a little ways. So was there something that happened, or was there just that moment where you said, I am going to reach out, I need help?
Yeah, for me, like I said, I started missing work. I mean, I started not eating. I was losing weight. And I couldn't figure out there's these mood changes, and I was embarrassed by those things. I mean, normally I'm kind and compassionate, and there'd be moments where I would explode or couldn't handle things or internalize things. And so I started looking around for a doctor that was that seemed to connect with me, and it was actually very hard in Little Rock, believe it or not. You know, one of the things about losing Curtis, that, you know, I didn't have rights at the time that Curtis passed, and there was a big battle over that. I mean, it took almost 3 months to bury him. It took 2 months to write the obituary. I mean, like, and so, you know, and even here in Little Rock, when I moved back, a lot of doctors didn't want to see me because I was gay, or there was issues. And believe it or not, I had 2 doctors that ran an HIV test on me, and I got the little things back, and they never asked for permission, which they can do in Arkansas, but in California they can't. But so I was looking around. I mean, it was very difficult. I went through 4 or 5 doctors, and I was carrying a lot, like I said, a lot of hurt, the grief, and then, you know, like I said, losing Curtis, and then society's approach to it. There was all this stuff coming down, and so, and you know, the doctor got me on the antidepressants. I called the EAP program through work to find a therapist. I went through several different therapists. I mean, that's another thing that I talk about with people, that your first therapist doesn't have to be the correct one. You have to find one that you connect with.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a great therapist who's now been with me for 4 years, and like I said, I think it's, like I said, I was noticing changes, and I think I was hoping to survive this, that there was some sort of little sliver of hope, that I was hoping that I could overcome this, and I didn't know how that was going to happen. And so then that's how I made those steps. And then, like I said, after I started the antidepressants, I had a few mini strokes after that, but I was still having issues. And like I said, it was a year and a half, 2 years into losing Curtis, and then my mama, which they call complex grief. So for me, it was a little bit more complicated.
Sure.
But it just, you know, and the thing is, I guess I want to bring this up, is that, you know, even with me, I'm 41. We never talked about mental illness. We didn't talk about what those signs were. I mean, when I was little, I was a child of adoption, and I went through some pretty horrible things that led to the adoption, but there was no therapist. I mean,
right.
You know, they took you to church and prayed over you. I mean, that was the answer. And so even when I was trying to identify what was going on, I even found myself struggling with those stigmas and those barriers, and even now I find myself still struggling sometimes, and I have to step back, and you know, and I'm learning how to change the way we talk about it as well. Like, one example is that commit suicide always just made me feel so nasty, and I'm glad that they are now moving to saying pass by suicide. Because I think that language honors the dignity of those that have passed on, and it honors the family. The word commit, for example, sounds like you've committed a crime, and there is no crime.
Right.
They were sick.
Right.
And, you know, and religion plays a part in that. And like I said, we're working to overcome those barriers. And so for me, I think that's why it took so long, is because I didn't understand myself. And so I thought I was losing my mind, is what was happening. I just, but like the path that I've chosen, the therapy and the medications and the treatment, and I even do things like self-care, like yoga. I mean, yoga has been incredibly helpful for me. And we had a great thing here in Little Rock called Grieving Gracefully, which is the yoga and meditation. And those are the ways that I'm learning, to overcome some of these barriers, because I honestly believe that I will probably have to take care of that depression and grief for the rest of my life, because I don't think it ever goes away. I mean, I'm not trying to be pessimistic about it, but there are going to be moments. And so it's like anybody that's struggling with either addiction or a long-term health issue, you have to stay on top of it. And so making sure that you stay committed to that process and finding ways that help you are crucial.
As Patrick Kennedy had mentioned, that your brain is the most complex organ in your body by far.
Right.
And that we do so much to take care of our heart and our lungs and our kidney and everything, but do we do enough to take care of our brain? Well, I appreciate you opening up and talking about this, because it's good for people to know they're not alone. It's good for people to know that there is hope. You did mention hope several times and wanting things to get better. And I hope that the people today that listen to you will write down in their journal that they are appreciative of you opening up and talking about this. I think we could probably talk for hours, and because it is a very complex thing, the grieving process, and also finding yourself in the middle of turmoil and chaos. And like you said, it was a complex grief process. I mean, you've lost your mother and your partner in a very short period of time, and obviously you have deep emotions, being that creative spirit, and you try to find ways to define who you are going to be as you live with this forever, because it's not anything that's going to simply just vanish. That you'll always carry Curtis and your mother and your father and others with you as you move forward. So I appreciate you coming in and talking to us.
And I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate the work that you all do. I mean, as I mentioned to you, you all are a very compassionate and needed voice, and so I feel honored that you had me out to talk about it. And if I could just say, I mean, one of the things that if for people that are struggling, I mean, I made something for myself that says "You matter," and it hangs up in my living room, and it reminds me every day. And I think that that's important, because often we get lost in that same darkness as we go through this process. And so, but I just want everybody to know that they matter, that they're not alone, as you mentioned. They're not going crazy. This is all a very difficult thing that there's no book for, and so we have to. The only way to get through it is if we get through it together with open hearts and an open mind. So.
Yeah. And we reach out.
Absolutely. And that's really difficult. If I can touch on that just real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I've done, and I'm not great about reaching out, for me, isolation is the key. Like I've created a prison. But what I've done is, and it sounds a little silly to people, to some, but I created a lifeboat. And so I drew out a lifeboat, and on each part of the lifeboat, I wrote a number and a name of somebody that I know will be there for me. And so, even in those times when I'm struggling and I don't want to pick up the phone, I'll see that lifeboat, and I'm starting to use it. So I'll start calling those numbers, and it's those little things that you don't think really you might need, but they trigger things. And so, to touch on that. Yeah, reaching out is important, and making sure you reach out to people that are going to not write you off or to try to tell you that your emotions are not valid or that you should move on. Find people that support you, that are willing to hold you up in the darkness, because there's no timetable, as I mentioned before. So.
And there's people like that in our lives, and we know who they are.
Right.
And those should be the first ones we reach out to.
Yeah, Absolutely.
Michael, I do appreciate it. I've enjoyed spending time with you that we've had together. I hope that we spend a lot more time together. And I know that it's not an easy thing to share these moments, but I do appreciate you coming in and talking.
And I appreciate you as well.
Thank you, Michael Dean. Again, you're listening to the STARR Coalition podcast. You can catch up to new podcasts at www.thestarr.org, THESTARR.org. And thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.